What if tomorrow morning you looked in the mirror and your own face wasn't yours anymore? One eye kept blinking, your mouth twisted into a smile you never made, your cheek pulled upward like an invisible string was tied to it, and no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't stop it. Every doctor said you were fine. 8 doctors, 3 brain scans, 28 months, no answers. This is not a horror film. This is the true story of Tippi McInerny, a retired massage therapist from Minnesota. And when the truth finally emerged, it was so unexpectedly simple that it left everyone in disbelief. For Tippi, dental work was an old, familiar chore. Over the years, she had endured 6 root canals, so when her dentist kept her mouth open for over an hour in February 2022 to repair a filling on her lower right molar, she wasn't particularly worried. Several shots of local anesthetic were standard procedure, but something was different this time. The numbness, the heavy metallic tingling that usually fades in a few hours, lingered for 2 full days. It was the first whisper of a storm, though no one recognized it then. A few weeks later, Tippi began to notice strange sensations radiating across her face, specifically around her right eye. She described it with the clarity of someone forced to become an expert in her own anatomy. It felt like someone took my eyeball out and put a little sweater over it. I could see perfectly fine, but the sensation was as if a soft cloth was draped over it. There was also a persistent buzzing on the right side of her jaw. Tippi suspected the dental work was the culprit. Perhaps the needle had nicked a nerve, or maybe she was having a delayed allergic reaction to the anesthetic, though she'd never had one before. She visited an ophthalmologist who peered into her eyes, found them healthy, and sent her home with a clean bill of health. But the calm was about to shatter. In March 2022, while sitting quietly in her living room, Tippi felt her right eyelid begin to flutter. It wasn't a casual coffee-induced twitch. It was a violent, relentless blinking. And then, as if a switch had been flipped, the right corner of her mouth began to pull upward, yanking toward her cheek like a marionette controlled by an overzealous puppeteer. It's really weird when your body's moving and you're not moving it, she later reflected. The fear was visceral, primal. Was this a stroke? Rushed to the emergency room, Tippi underwent a battery of immediate tests. Blood panels, reflex checks, balance assessments, speech evaluations, all came back pristine. No stroke, no immediate neurological catastrophe. Her primary care physician dismissed any connection to the dental work, calling it a coincidence. An MRI of her brain was ordered, and Tippi lay in the humming tube, hoping for a revelation. The report came back, unremarkable, normal, but if the scans were normal, then what was pulling the muscles on her face every single day? What invisible force was turning her expression into a grotesque puppet show, moment after moment, without any explanation? Frustrated but not defeated, Tippi sought out a neurologist. She sat in the sterile office, her face quivering involuntarily as she spoke. The neurologist watched the rhythmic spasms and delivered a diagnosis: hemifacial spasm. It was a rare neurological condition, characterized by involuntary contractions of the muscles on one side of the face. It was a label, but it wasn't an answer. The neurologist explained that a hemifacial spasm is typically triggered by a blood vessel pressing against the facial nerve at the brainstem. But if that were the case, the MRI should have shown it. It didn't. And so began the arduous odyssey through the medical maze. Tippi saw one doctor after another, 8 in total. Each had a different theory, a new medication to try, or a suggestion that perhaps it was stress, anxiety, or the natural aging process. One even hinted that it might be psychosomatic. Yet, Tippi knew her body. She knew the sensation was as real as the pulse in her wrist. The dismissals, however, cut deeper than the spasms themselves. There is a profound shame in losing control of your face. Tippi, once a gregarious woman who would strike up conversations with strangers in the grocery aisle, began to retreat. She became a ghost in her own life, avoiding eye contact, dodging social gatherings, and wearing a metaphorical mask to hide the physical one she couldn't control. She admitted that the isolation and uncertainty were more devastating than any physical pain, worse than 2 divorces, worse than losing loved ones. You have to know why, she insists. You have to be your own advocate. Months turned into a year, and the spasms didn't plateau. They worsened. Tippi underwent 3 brain scans in total. Each time, the radiologist's report came back with the same cold clinical word: normal. The doctors were baffled. The medical literature suggested that if a vessel was compressing the nerve, it would be glaringly obvious on a standard MRI. They explored alternative explanations, diving deep into the differential diagnosis. Could it be facial myokemia, a benign, persistent muscle rippling often linked to stress or fatigue? But that usually doesn't pull the mouth into a grimace. Could it be a tic disorder? But tics are typically suppressible and often preceded by a premonitory urge. Tippi had none. Could it be myoclonus originating in the brainstem? That would involve different neural pathways and usually presents with more erratic, lightning-fast jerks. Each possibility led to a dead end. During this time of uncertainty, Tippi turned to the wider world for answers. She posted her story on social media, sharing videos of her facial spasms in a desperate bid for connection. The responses were overwhelming, a flood of supportive messages from strangers who had similar stories, and a few who pointed her toward a specific type of specialist, a neurosurgeon specializing in movement disorders. It was a faint glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark tunnel. 28 months after that initial dental appointment, Tippi finally sat before a highly experienced neurosurgeon. The doctor didn't just read the radiologist's report on her latest MRI. They requested the original images and scrolled through them, slice by slice, pixel by pixel, with the patience of an archaeologist sifting for fossils. And then they saw it. A vessel, a tiny, almost imperceptible artery, was snuggled perfectly against the facial nerve. It wasn't the large, pulsating vein that usually causes this condition, which is why the standard scans had missed it. It was a diminutive branch, so close to the nerve that the distortion it caused was invisible to the automated reading software and the untrained eye. But it was there, undeniable in its simplicity. This was a classic case of neurovascular compression. The mechanism is brutally straightforward. The artery's rhythmic expansion with every heartbeat was repeatedly irritating the sheath of the facial nerve, like a water droplet constantly tapping the same spot on a drum. This irritation caused the nerve to fire erratic, uncoordinated signals to the facial muscles, resulting in the uncontrollable spasms. There was finally an answer. After 8 doctors, 3 brain scans, and 28 months of agony, Tippi finally knew why her face had been betraying her. She knew the name of the enemy, she knew where it lived, but finding the cause didn't mean the nightmare was over, because the only permanent treatment required opening her skull. The treatment options were starkly different. Option 1, botulinum toxin, Botox injections. These would temporarily paralyze the overactive facial muscles, providing relief for a few months at a time. It was a bandage, a management strategy, but not a cure. Option 2, microvascular decompression, MVD surgery. This was an invasive, open brain procedure where the surgeon would create a small opening in the skull, locate the offending vessel, and insert a tiny Teflon sponge between the artery and the nerve, a permanent physical buffer. It was riskier, requiring weeks of recovery and carrying the potential for rare but serious complications like hearing loss or facial weakness. Tippi didn't hesitate. She had lived in the shadows of her own face for nearly 2.5 years. She chose the surgery. Under the bright lights of the operating room, the neurosurgeon meticulously performed the procedure. They found the tiny artery and the irritated nerve, exactly as the imaging had hinted. A microscopic piece of Teflon was delicately placed between them. The moment the artery was lifted away from the nerve, the electrical storm in the nerve ceased. The surgery was a complete success. When Tippi woke up in the recovery room, the first thing she did was smile, a genuine, voluntary, and utterly steady smile. The twitching was gone. The pulling had stopped. Her face, her identity was finally, mercifully, her own again. There were no further spasms. Tippi McInerny's story is a powerful medical parable. It reveals that sometimes the most complex and debilitating conditions stem from the most elementary physical causes. 8 doctors, 3 scans, and 28 months of agony were resolved not by a groundbreaking drug or a revolutionary gene therapy, but by a simple anatomical truth: a misplaced vessel. Her journey underscores the importance of persistence, of looking beyond the standard report, and of trusting the narrative of your own body. It serves as a reminder that the human body is a landscape of intricate connections, where a millimeter of space can mean the difference between suffering and liberation. And for Tippi, liberated she was, her smile no longer a symptom, but a symbol of resilience.